The Visitor Who Never Left Foxglove Hall. Chapter 1. The Gentleman in the Rain. Foxglove Hall stood on a gentle rise beyond the village of Brindle Ash, its red brick walls darkened by decades of English weather and its long windows reflecting the grey skies of late autumn. The year was 1958. From the lane below, the house appeared dignified rather than grand. It possessed the sort of respectability that suggested generations of careful management rather than great wealth. Ivy clung to portions of the eastern wing, while ancient yew hedges guarded the grounds with almost military precision. On a Wednesday afternoon in October, rain drifted steadily across the countryside. Inside the hall, preparations were underway for a gathering. Mrs. Harriet Penfold, mistress of Foxglove Hall, stood near the drawing-room fireplace, examining a silver tray. "No, no, Margaret," she said. "The sandwiches belong on the smaller platter. The cucumber ones always curl if they're crowded." The maid adjusted the arrangement obediently. Harriet was 63, elegant without vanity, and possessed the sort of calm authority that emerged from years of organizing households, charities, committees, and village events. Her brother, Dr. Oliver Penfold, sat nearby reading a newspaper. "You've arranged enough food for an army," he observed. "I have invited 12 people. 12 people do not consume 36 sandwiches. They do if Mrs. Barlow attends." Oliver smiled behind the newspaper. A knock sounded at the front door. Moments later, the butler entered. "Mrs. Penfold?" "Yes, Simmons?" "A gentleman has arrived." Harriet frowned. "A gentleman? He asks for shelter from the weather." The rain battered softly against the windows. Oliver lowered his paper. "Motor trouble, perhaps." "Apparently so, sir." Harriet exchanged a glance with her brother. Visitors occasionally appeared at Foxglove Hall seeking directions or assistance. The village roads were notoriously confusing after dark. "Show him in," she said. Simmons departed. A minute later he returned with the stranger. The newcomer removed his hat politely. He appeared to be around 50 years of age. His coat was soaked. His dark hair showed traces of silver near the temples. There was nothing immediately remarkable about him, yet several people would later recall an odd impression that he seemed to belong wherever he happened to be. "Mrs. Penfold?" he asked. "Yes. My name is Victor Hale. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." "Not at all. My motorcar has developed a rather dramatic dislike for your local roads." Oliver chuckled. "A common complaint. I'm waiting for a mechanic from Market St. Edmund." Harriet gestured toward the fire. "Please warm yourself." "You're exceedingly kind." As Victor Hale moved toward the hearth, Simmons accepted his wet coat. The stranger thanked everyone with easy charm. Within 10 minutes he appeared completely at home. Within 30 minutes he was discussing local history with Oliver. By tea-time he was entertaining Harriet's guests with amusing stories gathered during his travels. The gathering itself had begun. Village residents occupied armchairs and sofas. Mrs. Edith Barlow provided her usual commentary on everyone's business. Reverend Thomas Finch attempted unsuccessfully to steer conversations toward less scandalous topics. Mr. Cedric Wren, owner of the village hardware shop, complained about government regulations. Miss Alice Grayson listened more than she spoke, and among them sat an elderly lady knitting quietly near the window, Miss Jane Marple. Most people scarcely noticed her. Those who did generally regarded her as pleasant but unremarkable. Victor Hale, however, seemed genuinely interested. "You've lived here many years, Miss Marple." "Oh yes. And village life still holds your attention." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Human nature remains wonderfully consistent, Mr. Hale. One never quite exhausts the subject." He laughed. "An excellent answer. Thank you." The conversation moved elsewhere. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, yet she continued observing. The stranger possessed excellent manners. His stories were amusing. His memory seemed impressive. Still, she noticed small details. When Mrs. Barlow described a village resident who had moved away 15 years earlier, Victor displayed immediate recognition. When Reverend Finch mentioned an obscure parish dispute from 1949, Victor appeared oddly familiar with it. He knew things, not enough to attract attention, only enough to create questions. Questions Miss Marple quietly stored away. By evening, the mechanic had not arrived. Road flooding had apparently delayed him. Harriet insisted that Mr. Hale remain overnight. The stranger protested politely. Harriet insisted again. The matter was settled. One night only, Victor agreed. Of course, said Harriet. No one imagined otherwise. The following morning dawned cold and misty. Breakfast was served at 8:30. Victor Hale appeared refreshed and cheerful. Unfortunately, the mechanic still had not arrived. Another road had become impassable during the night. It seems Brindle Ash intends to keep me prisoner, Victor remarked. Oliver laughed. We're not generally known for kidnapping travellers. A third day passed, then a fourth. The car repair proved unexpectedly complicated. Replacement parts needed ordering. The village accepted Victor Hale's presence with remarkable speed. People greeted him in the street. Shopkeepers remembered his preferences. Even Mrs. Barlow declared him quite pleasant. This alone should have caused suspicion. Miss Marple noticed something else. Victor Hale never spoke much about himself. He answered questions readily enough, yet details remained vague. He had travelled extensively. He had worked in several professions. He possessed acquaintances across England. He seemed knowledgeable about architecture, medicine, literature, and farming, but concrete facts slipped away whenever anyone attempted to pin them down. One afternoon, Miss Marple encountered him outside the church. The churchyard glistened after recent rain. Victor paused beside an old gravestone. A peaceful place, he said. Yes. People reveal themselves in villages. Miss Marple glanced at him. Do they? Oh, indeed. Cities encourage concealment. And villages? Villages remember. Miss Marple's knitting bag rested upon her arm. That can be inconvenient, he smiled, particularly for those with secrets. The remark hung between them. Neither elaborated. A rook cried from a distant tree. Then Victor touched his hat and continued down the lane. Miss Marple watched him go. The conversation troubled her slightly, not because of what he had said, because of how carefully he had said it. 2 weeks later, Victor Hale remained at Foxglove Hall. His car had long since been repaired. No one seemed entirely certain why he had not left. Harriet appeared pleased by the company. Oliver enjoyed the discussions. The villagers accepted the situation. Only Miss Marple found it unusual. Visitors rarely lingered indefinitely. Yet Victor Hale had woven himself into village life with astonishing ease. He attended church. He helped organize a charity auction. He advised Mrs. Barlow regarding investments. He assisted Reverend Finch in cataloguing parish records. He became, in a surprisingly short time, indispensable. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Friday morning. Harriet received it during breakfast. The envelope bore no return address. She opened it casually. A moment later, all colour vanished from her face. Oliver looked up. Harriet? She folded the paper quickly. Nothing. Are you unwell? Perfectly. The answer came too quickly. Victor Hale noticed. So did Miss Marple. Harriet rose abruptly. I've just remembered an appointment. She left the room. The silence that followed lasted only seconds. Yet something had changed. Victor's expression remained pleasant, almost too pleasant. Miss Marple lowered her eyes to her teacup. She had observed the briefest flicker of recognition when Harriet opened the envelope. Recognition, expectation, perhaps even concern. The old lady said nothing, but somewhere in the back of her mind, a small warning bell began to ring. Very softly, very persistently, and before another fortnight had passed, one resident of Foxglove Hall would be dead. Chapter 2. The Lanterns of Harvest Fair. The Harvest Fair had always been the proudest event in Brindle Ash. Every October, the village green transformed into a lively patchwork of stalls, bunting, lanterns and laughter. Children competed in apple bobbing contests, gardeners displayed oversized vegetables, and bakers guarded secret recipes with near-military determination. The event had survived war, rationing, terrible weather, and countless committee disputes. Mrs. Edith Barlow often claimed the fair was the only thing preventing the complete collapse of civilization. On the afternoon of the fair, a pale autumn sun finally broke through the clouds. The village seemed determined to celebrate. Coloured lanterns hung between oak trees. Tables overflowed with cakes, preserves, and handmade crafts. A brass band tuned instruments near the church gate. Foxglove Hall had contributed generously as always. Harriet Penfold supervised several displays while attempting to hide an unusual nervousness. More than one person noticed, few understood. Since receiving the mysterious letter, she had become distracted. Twice she forgot appointments. She misplaced household accounts. She frequently glanced over her shoulder when walking through the village. When questioned, she insisted nothing was wrong. Nobody believed her, least of all Miss Marple. The elderly lady sat beside a stall displaying knitted blankets. Her needles moved steadily. People often assumed knitting prevented observation. In Miss Marple's case, it enhanced it. She watched Harriet speaking with Victor Hale near the cider tent. The conversation appeared cordial, yet Harriet's posture suggested discomfort. Victor remained calm, relaxed, almost reassuring. At one point, Harriet shook her head firmly. Victor responded quietly. Harriet looked away. A minute later they separated. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Interesting. Very interesting. By early evening the fair reached its busiest hour. Lanterns glowed beneath gathering darkness. Music drifted across the green. Children carried paper lights shaped like animals and stars. The atmosphere felt warm and festive. Dr. Oliver Penfold stood near the raffle table. Reverend Finch judged a pie competition. Cedric Wren argued cheerfully about cricket. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Then Harriet disappeared. No one noticed immediately. At a crowded village fair, people constantly moved from one stall to another. 20 minutes passed, then 30. Eventually Oliver began searching. "Has anyone seen my sister?" Several people offered uncertain answers. Someone thought she had gone toward the church. Another believed she had been walking near the river path. No one knew for certain. Oliver's concern grew. Harriet was not the sort of woman who vanished without explanation. Victor Hale joined the search. So did several villagers. Lanterns bobbed through the darkness as groups spread out across Brindle Ash. The village excitement slowly transformed into unease. Miss Marple remained seated. She continued knitting. To an outsider, she might have appeared unconcerned. In reality, she was thinking very carefully. Harriet's recent behavior, the anonymous letter, Victor Hale's arrival, his curious decision to remain. The pieces did not yet fit together, but they belonged to the same puzzle. She was quite sure of it. Then a cry echoed across the village green, a woman's voice, sharp, frightened. Everyone turned. The cry had come from the direction of the old boathouse near Foxglove Pond. Within moments people were running. Lantern light bounced wildly through the darkness. Oliver reached the pond first. What he found there would haunt him for years. The old boathouse stood partly hidden among willow trees. Its weathered timbers creaked whenever the wind crossed the water. The door stood open. Inside lay Harriet Penfold. She was motionless. One lantern had fallen beside her. Its glass chimney was shattered. For several seconds Oliver could not comprehend what he was seeing. His sister appeared merely unconscious. Then training overcame denial. He knelt beside her, touched her wrist, felt nothing. The terrible reality settled upon him. Harriet Penfold was dead. The news spread through Brindle Ash with astonishing speed. Within an hour every household knew. By midnight, speculation had already begun. The police arrived from Market St. Edmund shortly after 10 o'clock. Inspector Leonard Graves took charge of the investigation. He was a practical man in his late 40s who preferred facts to gossip. Unfortunately, villages rarely made such distinctions. The boathouse was examined. Witnesses were interviewed. The area was searched. And before dawn, the inspector reached a preliminary conclusion. Harriet Penfold had not died accidentally. Someone had killed her. The cause of death was not immediately obvious. There were no dramatic injuries, no obvious signs of struggle. Yet something about the scene felt wrong. Inspector Graves studied the boathouse carefully. The fallen lantern, the disturbed dust, a broken chair near the rear wall, several footprints, too many footprints. The fair had drawn dozens of people through the area earlier that evening. Sorting them would be difficult, very difficult. The inspector disliked difficult. He preferred clear solutions, simple solutions, and before long one presented itself. The next morning brought rain. Brindle Ash awoke beneath low clouds and heavy silence. Shops opened late. Conversations became whispers. Every villager seemed to possess a theory. Most theories were wrong. Mrs. Barlow alone managed to produce 6 entirely different explanations before lunch. By afternoon, she had expanded the number to 9. At Foxglove Hall, grief hung over every room. Oliver moved through the house like a man struggling to remain upright. Servants spoke quietly. Curtains remained half-drawn. Victor Hale appeared genuinely affected. He assisted with practical arrangements. He comforted visitors. He helped Oliver answer questions. Many found his presence reassuring. Miss Marple found it curious, very curious, because she had observed something nobody else appeared to notice. Victor Hale was saddened. Of that she had little doubt. But he was not surprised. The distinction mattered. That evening Miss Marple sat beside her sitting-room fire reviewing events. A knock interrupted her thoughts. It was Inspector Graves. The two had met before. The inspector respected her more than he admitted publicly. "Good evening, Miss Marple." "Inspector, I wondered if you might have observations." She smiled faintly. Villages produce observations in alarming quantities. Useful ones. Occasionally. The inspector accepted a cup of tea. "At present," he said, "our attention is focused upon one individual." Indeed, Harriet Penfold received a threatening letter. Miss Marple showed no reaction. "The letter has disappeared. How unfortunate." Several witnesses report an argument between Harriet and Cedric Wren last week. "Yes. He owed her money." Miss Marple stirred her tea. "Many people owe money. His fingerprints were found inside the boathouse. That hardly seems remarkable." The inspector sighed. "You disagree. I merely think villages are rarely as straightforward as they appear." Inspector Graves leaned back. "Then what troubles you?" Miss Marple was silent for several moments. The rain tapped softly against the window. Finally she spoke. "Mr. Hale." The inspector frowned. "Victor Hale?" "Yes." "What about him? Why did he come here?" "His car broke down." "Did it?" The inspector stared. "Are you suggesting it didn't?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "No, merely observing that some arrivals are accidents and others are opportunities. That's rather vague. Human nature often is." After the inspector departed, Miss Marple remained awake for some time. The mystery continued turning slowly in her mind. Harriet had been frightened. Someone had written to her. Victor Hale had arrived shortly beforehand. Then Harriet died. There was something hidden beneath the surface, something old, something that had begun long before Victor Hale ever appeared in Brindle Ash. And somewhere among the village gossip, the forgotten memories, and the carefully concealed truths lay a clue so small that nobody had yet recognized its importance. Nobody except Miss Marple, though even she did not yet understand exactly what it meant, only that it mattered, a great deal. Chapter 3. A Name Written Twice. Rain persisted throughout the following week. It swept across the fields surrounding Brindle Ash, turning lanes to mud and keeping villagers indoors long enough for speculation to flourish unchecked. Harriet Penfold's death dominated every conversation, at the bakery, at the post office, after church services, even during the Women's Institute meeting, where several members attempted, and failed, to focus on flower arrangements. Everyone wanted answers, everyone possessed theories, and nearly everyone was convinced that Cedric Wren was responsible. Cedric himself looked increasingly exhausted. The hardware shop remained open, but customers found him distracted. His usually cheerful manner had vanished. When Inspector Graves questioned him publicly regarding his whereabouts on the night of the harvest fair, word spread through the village before the interview had ended. By the following morning, many regarded him as practically convicted. Miss Marple regarded this development with concern. Villages, she reflected, often resembled flocks of sheep. Once enough people moved in one direction, the rest followed. Truth rarely benefited from such enthusiasm. One afternoon, Miss Marple paid a visit to the parish archives. The records occupied several dusty cupboards behind Reverend Finch's office. Victor Hale had spent considerable time there during his stay in Brindle Ash. The fact interested her. Visitors seldom devoted holidays to old parish documents. The Reverend greeted her warmly. "Miss Marple, looking for local history?" "In a manner of speaking," he smiled. "You're not the first." "Oh?" "Mr. Hale has become quite the researcher." "Indeed." He spent hours examining baptism records. Miss Marple paused. "Baptism records?" "Yes. Family history, perhaps." "So I assumed." The Reverend unlocked a cabinet. Remarkably patient fellow. Was he looking for a particular family? I couldn't say. He considered. "Though I do remember one peculiar thing." Miss Marple waited. He copied several names. "Only several? Not entire families." "Interesting." The Reverend opened a notebook. "I believe he accidentally left this list behind." Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. The page contained half a dozen surnames: Penfold, Ashcombe, Dyer, Bristow, Holloway, and one more, Fairchild. A faint expression crossed her face. Not surprise. Recognition, the sort that arrives before understanding. Later that day, she walked home slowly through the village. The names lingered in her thoughts. Families. Old families. Families whose roots stretched back generations in Brindle Ash. What connected them? What had Victor Hale hoped to find? The answer hovered just beyond reach. Then something else occurred to her, a small detail, the kind most people overlooked. Miss Marple stopped walking. A memory surfaced. Weeks earlier, during tea at Foxglove Hall, Victor Hale had casually mentioned a former schoolmaster from a nearby county. Not merely mentioned him, corrected someone about him. The correction had been accurate, exceptionally accurate, yet the schoolmaster had died more than 20 years earlier. How had Victor known? At the time she had dismissed the matter. Now it returned with unexpected force. She resumed walking, very slowly. The puzzle pieces were beginning to shift. The following morning, Inspector Graves made his move. Cedric Wren was arrested. The news swept through Brindle Ash like wildfire. Several villagers declared they had expected it all along. Others suddenly remembered suspicious incidents involving Cedric from years earlier. Miss Marple noticed that these recollections conveniently appeared only after the arrest. Human memory, she reflected, possessed remarkable flexibility. At Foxglove Hall, Oliver Penfold reacted with mixed emotions. Part of him wanted justice. Another part remained uncertain. The certainty displayed by everyone else somehow increased his doubts. Victor Hale appeared supportive, reasonable, sympathetic. "If the evidence points to him," he said gently, "the police must act." Oliver nodded. Yes. Yet his voice lacked conviction. Victor studied him carefully. "You're troubled." Cedric argued with Harriet certainly. But murder? Victor offered no reply. The silence itself seemed meaningful. That evening, Miss Marple received an unexpected visitor. Alice Grayson arrived shortly after sunset. The young woman appeared nervous. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, dear." Alice sat down. For a moment she seemed uncertain whether to speak. Then words emerged in a rush. "I don't think Cedric killed Mrs. Penfold." Miss Marple folded her hands. "Why?" "Because I saw someone else near the boathouse." The old lady's eyes sharpened slightly. "Tell me." Alice hesitated. "It was dark, of course. I couldn't see clearly." "Nevertheless," Alice took a breath. "About 10 minutes before people started searching for Mrs. Penfold, I noticed a man walking away from the pond." "A man?" "Yes." "Did you recognize him?" "No." "Can you describe him?" Alice frowned. "Not very well." Miss Marple waited patiently. "The odd thing," Alice said slowly, "was his coat." "His coat? It looked too large." Miss Marple remained silent, almost as though it belonged to somebody else. After Alice departed, Miss Marple sat thoughtfully before the fire. A coat too large. An insignificant detail, perhaps, yet insignificant details frequently proved important. She recalled another observation: Victor Hale's coat. When he first arrived at Foxglove Hall, it had been soaked by rain. Simmons had taken it away. The next morning Victor had worn a different coat entirely. Nobody had questioned it. Why would they? Guests often possessed multiple garments. Still, Miss Marple's knitting needles rested motionless. A rare occurrence. Very rare. 2 days later she visited the village post office. The postmistress, Mrs. Pike, possessed a gift for remembering letters, not their contents, their movements. She remembered who sent them, who received them, and who appeared anxious while doing either. Conversation drifted naturally toward Harriet Penfold, then toward anonymous correspondence. Then, quite casually, Miss Marple asked a question. "Did Mrs. Penfold receive many unusual letters recently?" Mrs. Pike considered. "Only one that I noticed." "The anonymous one?" "Yes." "Anything unusual about it?" The postmistress frowned. "Actually," Miss Marple waited. "The handwriting seemed familiar." "Oh, I couldn't place it." Mrs. Pike shook her head. "It annoyed me for days." Miss Marple smiled. "Memory often works in its own time." "It certainly does." The postmistress laughed, then suddenly stopped. Her expression changed. "I remember." "Do you?" The writing resembled another envelope. Miss Marple's heart quickened slightly. "Whose?" "Victor Hale's." Silence settled between them. Neither woman spoke for several seconds. At last Mrs. Pike added, "Not exactly identical. No, but similar enough to catch my attention." That night, Miss Marple reviewed everything she knew: the anonymous letter, Victor's unexplained interest in village records, the list of family names, the oversized coat, the familiar handwriting. Individually, none proved anything. Together, however, they suggested direction. Direction mattered. One did not solve murders through certainty. One solved them through patterns. Human beings repeated themselves. Repeated habits, repeated mistakes, repeated sins. The trick was recognizing which pattern mattered. Near midnight, another development occurred. Someone broke into Harriet Penfold's study. The intruder searched drawers, opened cabinets, removed papers, and vanished before dawn. Nothing valuable appeared stolen. Only documents. Specific documents. When Inspector Graves learned of the burglary, he was furious. When Miss Marple learned of it, she became interested. Very interested. Because burglars seeking money behaved one way, burglars seeking information behaved quite differently. And someone, somewhere in Brindle Ash, was becoming nervous. Nervous people made mistakes. The clever ones simply took longer. Chapter 4. The Locked Drawer. The burglary at Foxglove Hall transformed the investigation. Until then, Inspector Graves had regarded Harriet Penfold's murder as a relatively straightforward matter. Difficult, perhaps, but understandable. A disagreement, a threat, a suspect with financial troubles. The break-in changed that. Murderers occasionally acted out of passion. They did not usually return to search through documents after the crime, at least not unless those documents contained something dangerous, something worth risking discovery, something capable of exposing a secret. The morning after the burglary, Foxglove Hall resembled a disturbed anthill. Police officers moved from room to room. Servants answered questions repeatedly. Oliver Penfold attempted to remain patient but was visibly strained. Miss Marple arrived shortly before 11. Inspector Graves greeted her with a weary expression. "I suppose you've come to tell me I arrested the wrong man. Have I ever said such a thing?" "Not directly." "Then perhaps I shall maintain my record." The inspector sighed. "Someone entered Harriet's study." "Yes." "They ignored silverware." "Interesting." "They ignored jewellery." "More interesting." "They searched only papers." Miss Marple nodded. The inspector watched her carefully. "You expected that reaction." "Did I?" "You already have a theory." "I have several." "Wonderful." His tone suggested the opposite. Harriet's study occupied a quiet corner of the west wing. The room overlooked the gardens. Books lined the walls. A large desk stood beside the window. One drawer remained open. Its lock had been forced. Inspector Graves pointed toward it. That's where the intruder concentrated most of his attention. Miss Marple examined the damaged wood. Did he find what he wanted? We don't know. Has anything been identified as missing? Oliver answered. A file box. What kind of file box? Black leather. Contents? Oliver frowned. I'm not entirely certain. You don't know? My sister handled many household records herself. Miss Marple turned. Did Harriet ever mention keeping personal documents there? No. The answer came too quickly. Not deceptive, merely uncertain. People often concealed ignorance beneath confidence. Miss Marple noticed such things. As the conversation continued, her gaze wandered toward a bookshelf. There was nothing remarkable about it. Not immediately. Then she noticed a slight discoloration in the dust. A rectangular space. Something had stood there recently. Something now absent. She approached. Inspector Graves followed. What is it? Miss Marple pointed. The inspector stared. A book, possibly, or a box. Yes. The mark suggested long-term placement. Whatever had occupied that space had remained there for years, then recently disappeared. Very recently. The inspector rubbed his chin. Nobody mentioned this. People rarely notice what belongs. Later that afternoon, after police departed, Oliver invited Miss Marple to remain for tea. The hall felt strangely hollow without Harriet. Every room seemed quieter, every clock louder. The absence lingered. During tea, conversation drifted toward family history. Miss Marple encouraged this gently. Never directly. Direct questions often produced guarded answers. People preferred revealing things accidentally. Oliver proved no exception. My sister cared deeply about family records. Did she? Almost obsessively. Genealogy can become addictive. He smiled faintly. She spent years tracing village connections. How fascinating. Not to me. What sort of connections? Births, marriages, old relationships. Miss Marple stirred her tea. Any particular family? Oliver hesitated. The Fairchilds. There it was. The name from Victor Hale's list. Miss Marple remained calm. An old village family. One of the oldest. Are they still here? Not anymore. Oliver looked toward the rain-streaked window. The last Fairchild left decades ago. How sad. Perhaps. His expression suggested there was more. Much more. That evening Miss Marple returned home carrying a question that refused to leave her mind. Why the Fairchilds? Victor Hale had researched them. Harriet had researched them. Someone had stolen documents. And somewhere among those connections lay the reason Harriet was dead. The difficulty lay in discovering exactly what that reason was. The answer arrived from an unexpected source: Mrs. Edith Barlow. As frequently happened in villages, gossip succeeded where formal investigation failed. Miss Marple encountered Mrs. Barlow outside the bakery. The conversation began with weather, moved to funerals, then settled naturally upon local history. Mrs. Barlow possessed strong opinions regarding all three. The Fairchilds were a scandal. Miss Marple looked surprised. Were they? Oh yes. How dreadful. They pretended otherwise. Mrs. Barlow lowered her voice, as if nobody remembered. Remembered what? The older woman glanced around dramatically. No one talks about it now. They seldom do. There was a disappearance. Miss Marple became very still. A disappearance? Back in the 30s. Who disappeared? A young woman. From the Fairchild family? Good heavens, no. Mrs. Barlow leaned closer. She was a maid. The rain drummed softly upon nearby rooftops. Miss Marple listened. A maid at Foxglove Hall? Exactly. And she vanished, without explanation. What was her name? Mrs. Barlow thought. Clara. Clara what? Clara Bennett. The name meant nothing. Not yet. But names often became important later. That night, Miss Marple examined old newspaper clippings. She maintained a remarkable collection. Years of habit had produced dozens of scrapbooks. One eventually yielded results. A brief article. Local girl missing. The piece occupied less than 2 inches of column space. Clara Bennett, 22, employed locally, had failed to return home. Police inquiries produced no result. No further articles appeared. The story simply ended. Or perhaps, Miss Marple thought, it merely stopped being reported. Those were not always the same thing. The following day produced a second surprise. Inspector Graves visited with unexpected news. We've identified a discrepancy. Miss Marple looked interested. What sort? Victor Hale. Ah, the inspector blinked. You expected that too? Not precisely. His references don't quite fit. How unfortunate. He claims to have lived in Surrey between 1948 and 1951. And? The records suggest otherwise. Miss Marple folded her hands. Interesting. More than interesting. The inspector lowered his voice. Somebody is lying. By evening the village buzzed with fresh speculation. Few details were public. Rumours compensated enthusiastically. Some claimed Victor Hale was a criminal. Others insisted he was a government agent. Mrs. Barlow briefly supported both theories simultaneously. Meanwhile, Victor himself remained remarkably composed, almost too composed. When questioned casually regarding his background, he answered smoothly. When villagers discussed rumours, he laughed them away. When Inspector Graves requested another interview, he agreed immediately. No irritation, no anxiety, no visible fear. Miss Marple observed all this carefully, because one detail troubled her. People falsely accused of murder often became angry. People hiding secrets often became cautious. Victor Hale had become neither. Instead, he seemed watchful, as though waiting for something, or someone. 3 nights later, Miss Marple finally received the clue she had been missing. It came from Simmons, the butler. The man arrived unexpectedly after dark. He appeared deeply uncomfortable. I wasn't certain whether I should mention it. Please do. It concerns Mr. Hale. Miss Marple waited. Simmons cleared his throat. On the evening he first arrived, yes, I unpacked his belongings. And? There was very little luggage. Some travellers pack lightly, not for a stay of several weeks. Miss Marple said nothing. The butler continued. There was also a photograph. What sort of photograph? A woman. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. Did you recognize her? No. Can you describe her? Simmons nodded. Young, dark-haired. Anything else? There was writing on the back. The room seemed suddenly quieter. What writing? Simmons spoke slowly. "As best I recall," he frowned, then repeated the words, "for our son. One day he must know the truth." Silence followed. Long silence. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Inside, Miss Marple sat perfectly still. At last she spoke. "Thank you, Simmons." The butler departed. The old lady remained alone beside the fire. A maid named Clara Bennet. A vanished scandal. The Fairchild family. Harriet's secret documents. Victor Hale's false history. And now a photograph, carrying a message about a son who must learn the truth. For the first time since Harriet Penfold's death, the shape of the mystery began to emerge. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Enough to understand that the murder was rooted not in recent events, but in something buried for more than 20 years, something somebody had spent a lifetime hiding, and somebody else had finally come to uncover. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Photograph. The following morning dawned bright and unexpectedly clear. After weeks of rain and cloud, sunlight spread across Brindle Ash like a visitor whose arrival nobody had anticipated. Miss Marple appreciated sunshine. It encouraged people outdoors. People outdoors talked, and talking, she often reflected, solved more mysteries than laboratories. She spent the morning strolling through the village with apparently aimless purpose. In reality, she was collecting fragments. Fragments frequently mattered. One never knew which tiny piece might complete a picture. By midday, she found herself visiting Mrs. Florence Carter. Mrs. Carter was 81 years old, partially deaf, fond of marmalade, and possessed a memory that functioned selectively. She forgot recent conversations almost immediately. Events from 30 years earlier remained perfectly preserved. Such people could be invaluable, if approached correctly. Miss Marple brought seed cake. The gesture improved cooperation considerably. Within 20 minutes they were discussing village history. Within 30 minutes they reached the year 1936. And within 35 minutes the name Clara Bennet emerged. Mrs. Carter's eyes brightened instantly. "Oh, I remember Clara. Do you? Pretty girl." Miss Marple nodded encouragingly. "Very pretty. What was she like?" "Quiet, kind, mostly." The old woman lowered her voice. Men noticed her. That, Miss Marple suspected, was important. The conversation continued, slowly, patiently. As old memories surfaced, Clara Bennet had arrived in Brindle Ash during the spring of 1934. She worked first at the bakery. Later, she entered service at Foxglove Hall. At the time, the hall had belonged to Harriet and Oliver's parents. The Penfold family occupied a respected position in village life. The Fairchild family occupied another. For generations, the two households had been connected through business, church committees, and social obligations. Not friends exactly, but close enough. "Did Clara know the Fairchilds?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Carter laughed. "Oh my, yes. Particularly one of them?" The older woman nodded. "Particularly one." There it was, the answer she had expected. What was his name? Arthur. Miss Marple repeated it mentally. Arthur Fairchild. Another piece of the puzzle. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited the churchyard. Not because she expected revelations, because she enjoyed thinking there. The churchyard encouraged perspective. Generations rested beneath its stones. Scandals that once seemed enormous had long ago faded into names and dates. Human beings forgot. The past rarely did. She sat upon a bench and reviewed everything she knew. Clara Bennet, Arthur Fairchild, a disappearance, a photograph, a son, and Victor Hale. The connections were becoming clearer, yet one major question remained unanswered. If Victor Hale was somehow connected to Clara Bennet, why arrive now? Why 1958? Why not earlier? Why not later? Something recent had triggered his appearance. Something Harriet Penfold knew. The answer began emerging 2 days later. Inspector Graves arrived carrying a leather folder. His expression suggested reluctant admiration. You were correct. Miss Marple smiled gently. About which thing? Mr. Hale. There are several possibilities. The inspector sighed. His name. Ah, it isn't Victor Hale. Miss Marple had expected as much. Then who is he? We're not entirely certain. Interesting. He possesses identification. False? Not completely. The inspector sat down. The name exists. Yet the history doesn't. Miss Marple folded her hands. Someone constructed a life. Precisely. And carefully. Very carefully. The inspector rubbed his forehead. I dislike carefully. Most policemen do. The investigation had uncovered another detail. Several weeks before arriving in Brindle Ash, Victor Hale had visited 3 different towns. In each location he had examined public records, birth records, marriage records, property records, family histories. The pattern was unmistakable. He had been searching. For what, nobody knew. Yet the search eventually led him to Brindle Ash, and to Foxglove Hall. That evening another piece arrived unexpectedly. Alice Grayson visited again. This time she carried a small notebook. I found something. Miss Marple looked interested. What sort of something? It belonged to my grandfather. Alice opened the notebook. My grandfather worked for the Fairchild family. Miss Marple's attention sharpened immediately. Go on. He kept notes. The pages were filled with dates, deliveries, weather observations, farm accounts, ordinary details. Then one entry caught Miss Marple's eye. June 1936. A single sentence. Arthur left in a terrible hurry after an argument at Foxglove Hall. Nothing more, yet Miss Marple stared at the words for several seconds. Arguments mattered, particularly arguments that preceded disappearances. Later that night, she returned to the newspaper clipping about Clara Bennett. This time she noticed something she had previously overlooked. Not in the article itself, in the date. Clara vanished in September 1936. The notebook entry occurred 3 months earlier. Arthur Fairchild argued with someone at Foxglove Hall. Then Clara disappeared. Interesting. Very interesting. The following morning brought an even more significant discovery. Reverend Finch requested a meeting. He seemed unusually serious. I found something among the parish records. Miss Marple listened carefully. The Reverend placed a document on the table. It was old, fragile, partially faded. A baptism entry. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles. The record dated from 1937. No father's name appeared. That was unusual enough, but not remarkable. What was remarkable was the mother's name, Clara Bennett. For several moments neither spoke. The Reverend finally broke the silence. The child survived, apparently. He was born months after Clara disappeared. Miss Marple nodded slowly. A son. Exactly as the photograph suggested. The child had existed, documented, recorded, real. The mystery deepened, because nobody in Brindle Ash had ever mentioned such a child. Not once. Where was the baptism performed? Miss Marple asked. The Reverend pointed. A small church nearly 40 miles away, far enough to avoid attention, far enough to conceal scandal. Miss Marple examined the page again. One final detail caught her eye. The infant's given name, Michael. No surname, just Michael. The absence spoke volumes. Someone had deliberately hidden the child's identity. That afternoon, Miss Marple walked through the gardens of Foxglove Hall. Oliver accompanied her. The autumn air felt sharp. Leaves drifted across gravel paths. For a time they discussed Harriet. Then Miss Marple asked quietly, "Did your sister ever mention Clara Bennett?" Oliver stopped walking, only briefly, but briefly was enough. Clara? Yes. The hesitation lasted a fraction too long. Miss Marple noticed. Of course she noticed. I barely remember her. The answer sounded rehearsed, not consciously. Simply old, repeated over many years. People who told themselves a story long enough eventually believed it. She worked here, for a while, and then disappeared. Oliver looked away. That was a long time ago. Indeed, neither spoke for several moments. Then Oliver said something unexpected. Harriet never forgave herself. Miss Marple turned. For what? Oliver seemed surprised by his own words, as though they had escaped accidentally. He frowned. I shouldn't have said that. But you did. Oliver stared across the lawn. The silence stretched. Finally he shook his head. No, and refused to say another word. That evening Miss Marple sat alone by her fire. The pieces now formed a recognizable outline. Arthur Fairchild and Clara Bennet had been connected. A child had been born. The child's identity had been hidden. Harriet carried guilt for decades. Victor Hale arrived searching for answers. The photograph referred to a son who deserved the truth. One possibility now stood above all others. Not certainty, but possibility. Victor Hale might not be searching for the missing child. He might be the missing child. If so, he had spent years assembling fragments of a forgotten past. Years tracing clues. Years searching for people who knew what happened to his mother. And if Harriet Penfold had finally revealed, or threatened to reveal, something important, then the motive for murder might be far older and far more dangerous than anyone imagined. Miss Marple gazed into the fire. A hidden birth, a vanished woman, a false identity, and somewhere in Brindle Ash, someone who had lived with the truth for 22 years, someone who had become desperate enough to kill in order to keep it buried. Chapter 6. The Shadow at the Cemetery Gate. The funeral of Harriet Penfold took place beneath a sky the colour of old pewter. A cold wind swept across the churchyard, carrying fallen leaves among the gravestones and bending the branches of the ancient yews that guarded St. Jude's Church. Nearly the entire village attended. Harriet had been one of those people whose presence became woven into the daily fabric of a place. One noticed her absence constantly, because one had noticed her presence without realizing it. The church bells rang solemnly. Villagers spoke in hushed voices. Inspector Graves stood near the rear of the congregation, observing faces. Miss Marple sat quietly near the front. Her attention drifted occasionally toward Victor Hale, or whatever his real name might be. He appeared genuinely affected by the ceremony. His expression contained grief, but there was something else as well, expectation, as though he believed events were moving toward a conclusion. The observation troubled her, because if Victor had come seeking answers, he might be getting dangerously close to them, and dangerous truths often produced dangerous reactions. The service ended shortly after noon. Groups dispersed slowly across the churchyard. Conversations resumed. The ordinary rhythms of village life attempted to reassert themselves. Miss Marple exchanged a few words with Reverend Finch. Then she noticed someone standing alone near the cemetery gate. Oliver Penfold. He appeared distracted, almost frightened. More than once he glanced toward Victor Hale. The behavior lasted only seconds. Yet it was enough. Fear rarely appeared without reason. As she considered this, another figure entered the churchyard, Mrs. Edith Barlow. The woman possessed an uncanny ability to arrive wherever information might be available. Within minutes, she was speaking with half a dozen people. Within 10 minutes, she had generated 3 new theories regarding Harriet's death. Within 15 minutes, she approached Miss Marple. "Have you heard?" "Heard what?" Mrs. Barlow looked disappointed. It was always more satisfying when the listener lacked information. "About the cemetery?" "No. A stranger was seen here last night." Miss Marple looked mildly interested. "A stranger? Near midnight. Who saw him?" "Young Peter Lawson. The baker's son. Reliable enough, not imaginative, that mattered." "What did he see?" "A man near the cemetery gate," Miss Marple considered. "Did Peter recognize him?" "No." Mrs. Barlow lowered her voice dramatically. "But he said the fellow was watching Foxglove Hall." "That was more interesting." Far more interesting. The matter might have remained village gossip if not for what happened the following evening. Shortly after dusk, Victor Hale was nearly killed. The incident occurred on Mill Lane. The narrow road curved sharply around an old stone bridge before descending toward the river. Victor was walking back from the village when a motorcar suddenly accelerated from behind. Witnesses later described the vehicle as dark-colored, possibly black, possibly navy blue. Nobody agreed on details. Everyone agreed on one fact. The driver made no attempt to slow down. The car struck Victor hard enough to throw him into a hedge, then vanished, without stopping, without hesitation, without explanation. The village doctor arrived quickly. Fortunately, Victor survived, bruised, shaken, injured, but alive. Inspector Graves immediately classified the event as attempted murder. The timing alone made coincidence impossible. Somebody wanted Victor Hale silenced, or dead, perhaps both. Miss Marple visited him the following morning. Victor rested in a guest room at Foxglove Hall. His left arm was bandaged. Several bruises darkened his face, yet his mind appeared perfectly clear. "Good morning, Miss Marple. How are you feeling?" "I've experienced more comfortable mornings." "That is fortunate." Victor laughed softly. "Fortunate? Had the driver possessed better aim, we might not be speaking." The humour faded. For a moment his expression hardened. Only for a moment. Then it vanished. "You believe it was deliberate." "Do you?" He looked toward the window. "Yes." The answer came quietly, without hesitation. Miss Marple sat beside the bed. "You seem unsurprised." Victor smiled faintly. "Should I be? Most people are surprised when someone attempts to kill them. Not if they've been expecting it." The words lingered between them. Neither spoke. At length Miss Marple said, "You came to Brindle Ash for a reason." Victor's gaze met hers. "Yes. And you found something." "Perhaps. You found enough to frighten someone." For the first time, Victor did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. It sounded older, wearier. "I found more questions than answers. Questions about Clara Bennett." The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Then Victor nodded, very slowly. "I knew her name before I came here." Miss Marple remained quiet. Encouragement often worked better than interrogation. Victor continued, "I spent years searching. For your mother." His eyes widened slightly. Not because she had guessed, because she had guessed correctly. "Yes." The word barely emerged above a whisper. For a moment he seemed no longer a confident stranger in his 50s, simply a man carrying a lifetime of uncertainty. "I never knew her." Miss Marple listened. "I grew up with fragments." "What sort of fragments?" "A photograph." "The same photograph Simmons described?" Victor nodded. "A few letters." "And?" Questions nobody would answer. His gaze drifted toward the fireplace. "When I was young, I believed somebody would eventually tell me the truth." A bitter smile appeared. They never did. For several minutes he spoke about his search. Names discovered, records examined, dead ends followed, years lost. Eventually every trail led toward Brindle Ash, toward Foxglove Hall, toward Harriet Penfold. Yet when Miss Marple asked what Harriet had told him, Victor became cautious again. Too cautious. He didn't answer. Not everything. Interesting. Very interesting. Because it meant Harriet had revealed something. Something Victor was still concealing. That afternoon, Inspector Graves received another surprise. A witness came forward. The witness was Peter Lawson, the same baker's son who had reported seeing a stranger near the cemetery gate. This time he provided additional information. The night before Victor's accident, he had seen someone arguing near the old church wall. Two men. One of them was Victor Hale. The other remained unidentified. The argument appeared brief, yet intense. Peter remembered one phrase clearly. Only one. The stranger had shouted, "You should have left it buried," then walked away. The statement electrified the investigation. Inspector Graves immediately searched for the unknown man. Without success. No visitor matching the description could be found. It was as though the individual had appeared from nowhere and vanished again. Meanwhile, Miss Marple pursued a different line of inquiry. She returned to parish records. Not baptism records this time. Marriage records, deaths, property transfers, small details, the sort most investigators ignored. And there, buried among routine documents, she discovered something unexpected. Not a crime, not a confession, a witness, a forgotten witness, a woman named Agnes Turner, former housekeeper at Foxglove Hall, now deceased. But in 1936 she had provided a brief statement regarding Clara Bennett's disappearance. The statement itself seemed harmless, yet one sentence caught Miss Marple's attention. Miss Bennett appeared frightened during her final week at the hall. Frightened, not sad, not ill, not distressed, frightened. The distinction mattered enormously, because frightened people feared something specific, or someone specific. Miss Marple copied the statement carefully, then sat back. A new possibility emerged. Everyone had assumed Clara Bennett vanished because of scandal, a secret romance, an illegitimate child, a desire to avoid gossip. Perhaps that explanation was incomplete. Perhaps Clara had not merely disappeared. Perhaps she had been running from something, or someone. That evening another revelation arrived unexpectedly. Oliver Penfold came to visit. The man looked exhausted, as though years rather than weeks had passed since Harriet's death. He accepted tea, ignored it, then spoke without preamble. Harriet lied. Miss Marple waited. About Clara Bennett. The old lady remained silent. People often revealed more when uninterrupted. Oliver stared into the fire. My sister carried that guilt her entire life. Guilt for what? He swallowed. For several moments he seemed uncertain whether to continue. Then he did. Because Clara came to Harriet for help. The room felt suddenly smaller. What kind of help? Oliver closed his eyes. But she was terrified. Miss Marple's knitting lay forgotten beside her chair. Terrified of whom? Oliver opened his eyes. His face had become pale. Very pale. And when he answered, the words altered the entire shape of the mystery. Not Arthur Fairchild. Silence. Then, someone else. Chapter 7. The Secret Harriet Carried. For several moments after Oliver Penfold's revelation, neither he nor Miss Marple spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, evening shadows lengthened across the village. At last Miss Marple poured more tea. The simple action seemed to steady him. "Take your time," she said gently. Oliver nodded. His hands trembled slightly. Not from age, from memory. Some memories grew heavier with passing years rather than lighter. "It happened in August of 1936, he said. "I was 16. Miss Marple listened. "Harriet was much older than I was." "Yes. Our parents were away in Bath." He stared into the flames. "Clara came to Foxglove Hall after dark." The words emerged slowly, as though he were opening a door long kept locked. "She was crying. Did Harriet know why?" "Not immediately." Oliver paused. "Clara was pregnant." Miss Marple nodded. That much she had already suspected. The child belonged to Arthur Fairchild. Yes, another confirmation. Yet not the important one. Not the revelation Oliver had come to share. Arthur wanted to marry her. Miss Marple looked up sharply. Oliver gave a humourless laugh. "That surprises you. A little. Everyone assumed the worst of him afterward." "Did they? He wasn't perfect. Few people are. But he genuinely loved her." The statement changed several assumptions. Not completely, but significantly. Because if Arthur intended marriage, the scandal itself became less dangerous. There had to be another reason for Clara's fear. Miss Marple waited. Oliver eventually continued. "Clara wasn't afraid of Arthur. No. She was afraid of my father. The room fell silent. Miss Marple's face remained calm. Only someone who knew her exceptionally well might have noticed the slight narrowing of her eyes. Your father? Oliver nodded. Edward Penfold. Why? Oliver swallowed. The answer seemed difficult even after 22 years. Because he had become obsessed with her. Miss Marple remained very still. The pieces began shifting again. Rapidly. Unexpectedly. He noticed her shortly after she came to the hall. Oliver's voice sounded distant, as though he were describing someone else's life. At first, Harriet thought nothing of it. And later, he wouldn't leave Clara alone. The fire popped sharply. Neither reacted. He arranged excuses to speak with her, Oliver continued. Found reasons to keep her in the house after hours. Did Clara complain? Eventually. Miss Marple folded her hands. And Harriet believed her. Immediately. The answer came without hesitation. Harriet knew our father. Interesting. Very interesting. The story continued. According to Oliver, Harriet confronted Edward Penfold. The argument lasted nearly an hour. Voices had been heard throughout the house. Several servants later discussed it privately. No one dared speak openly. Edward Penfold was an influential man, respected, powerful. Accusations against such men rarely travelled far in 1936, particularly when made by young servants. What happened afterward? Miss Marple asked. Oliver stared into the fire. For a few days, nothing. Then, Clara became frightened. There was a reason? She claimed someone was following her. The old lady said nothing, watching her. Did she know who? Oliver shook his head. No, but she suspected. The implication remained unspoken. It hardly needed stating. 3 days before her disappearance, Clara arrived at Foxglove Hall after sunset. Exactly as Oliver had described. She asked to speak privately with Harriet. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, Harriet appeared deeply shaken. Did Clara tell her something? Yes. What? Oliver hesitated, then answered. She believed somebody intended to harm her. The words settled heavily between them. For years the village had assumed Clara simply vanished, left, ran away, started over elsewhere. Now that explanation seemed increasingly unlikely. Did Harriet tell anyone? No. Not even the police? No. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Human beings often concealed information for reasons that seemed sensible at the time, then spent decades regretting it. Why didn't Harriet come forward later? Oliver looked genuinely miserable. Because of what happened next. What happened? The answer emerged almost inaudibly. She received a letter. Miss Marple became very attentive. A letter. 2 days after Clara vanished. The similarity struck her immediately. Harriet had received an anonymous letter shortly before her murder. Now another letter appeared 22 years earlier. Patterns. Human beings loved patterns, particularly guilty ones. What did the letter say? Oliver reached into his coat. Miss Marple stared. You have it. I found it among Harriet's things after she died. Carefully he unfolded a fragile sheet of paper. Age had yellowed it. The ink had faded, yet the message remained legible. Miss Marple read silently. Only one sentence appeared. For everyone's sake, let the matter rest. No signature. No explanation. Nothing else. The old lady studied the page thoughtfully. Such messages always fascinated her. Not because of what they said, because of what they revealed. Anonymous writers frequently imagined themselves clever. In reality, they exposed far more than they realized. Did Harriet believe the threat? Yes. Why? Oliver looked uncomfortable. Because she knew who sent it. Miss Marple looked up. Did she? At least, she thought she did. And? She never told me. A disappointment. Yet not an unexpected one. Harriet had spent decades protecting someone, or fearing someone. Perhaps both. After Oliver departed, Miss Marple remained awake long into the night. The mystery had expanded again. Clara Bennet, Arthur Fairchild, Edward Penfold, threats, anonymous letters, fear, a hidden child. The picture was becoming clearer. Yet one section remained blurred. The murder itself. Past crimes explained motives. They did not necessarily explain present actions. The answer, unexpectedly, arrived the following morning. Not from a witness, not from a confession, from knitting. Miss Marple often found solutions while knitting. The rhythm helped organize thoughts. Patterns emerged, connections aligned, and suddenly she realized what had troubled her since the very beginning. The hidden clue, the clue everyone else had overlooked, including Inspector Graves, including Victor Hale, perhaps even Harriet herself. It concerned the anonymous letter Harriet received shortly before her death. Everyone focused on the message. Nobody focused on the timing. Yet timing mattered enormously. The letter arrived only days after Victor Hale became a familiar presence in Brindle Ash. Not when he first arrived. Not immediately. Later. Why? If the writer feared Victor's investigation, why wait? Unless, Miss Marple lowered her knitting, unless the writer had not recognized him at first. The realization sent a small shiver through her. Not fear, excitement. The peculiar excitement that accompanied understanding. Someone in Brindle Ash knew exactly who Victor really was. But they had recognized him only after spending time with him, only after observing him closely, only after seeing something familiar. A gesture, a mannerism, a resemblance, something inherited, something impossible to hide. Miss Marple rose and crossed to her writing desk. She opened a notebook. On a blank page, she wrote 4 names: Clara Bennet, Arthur Fairchild, Victor Hale, Edward Penfold. Then she stared at them for several moments. Finally, she added a 5th, a name she had not seriously considered before, a name that suddenly belonged in the center of the mystery, not at its edge, at its center. She underlined it once, then twice, and sat back thoughtfully, because if she was correct, the murderer had been standing in plain sight from the beginning, listening, watching, waiting, and had just made a very serious mistake. That afternoon, another shock struck Brindle Ash. The black leather file box, stolen from Harriet's study, was found. A farm labourer discovered it hidden beneath an old stone culvert near the river. The box itself remained intact. Its contents did not. Every document inside had been removed. Every photograph, every letter, every record, gone, deliberately, systematically. Whoever had stolen the box wanted information destroyed. Not merely hidden, destroyed. Inspector Graves immediately ordered a renewed search, but Miss Marple scarcely cared about the missing papers anymore, because for the first time since Harriet Penfold's death, she believed she knew exactly what those papers contained. And, more importantly, she believed she knew who was most desperate to keep them from being seen. Chapter 8. The Box Beneath the River Bridge. The discovery of the empty file box sent a fresh wave of excitement through Brindle Ash. Villagers gathered outside shops, discussing theories with renewed enthusiasm. Some believed the missing papers contained evidence of fraud. Others suggested wartime espionage. Mrs. Barlow advanced both possibilities before breakfast and added a third involving a smuggler from Cornwall by lunchtime. Inspector Graves ignored the gossip. He wanted facts. Unfortunately, facts remained stubbornly scarce. The box had been hidden beneath a stone culvert less than half a mile from Foxglove Hall. Recent rain had washed away most traces of whoever placed it there. The lock had been broken. The contents were gone. Nothing else. No clues. No fingerprints of value. No convenient confession. Merely another mystery attached to the larger one. Miss Marple, however, remained unusually cheerful. Not because the case had become simpler, because it had become clearer. There was a difference. Complex mysteries often became easier once one understood the relationships involved. The facts themselves might remain hidden, the motives no longer did, and motive, in Miss Marple's experience, mattered more than almost anything else. That afternoon she paid another visit to Victor Hale. His injuries had improved. He was walking again, though more carefully than before. The autumn sunlight streamed through the windows of Foxglove Hall's library. Victor appeared tired, years tired, not merely physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, like a man nearing the end of a very long journey. Miss Marple settled into a chair opposite him. For several moments neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "Your name isn't Victor Hale." He smiled faintly. "No, I thought not." The smile disappeared. "You've known for some time. Long enough." Victor walked slowly toward the window. The gardens stretched below. Harriet's roses had begun surrendering to autumn. "Would you like the truth?" "Very much." He nodded, then finally spoke. "My name is Michael Bennet." The words hung in the room. Though Miss Marple had already suspected them, hearing them spoken aloud altered everything. Not Victor Hale. Michael Bennet, the child from the baptism record, the son Clara Bennet never raised. The son who had spent more than 20 years searching for answers. "I was adopted." His voice remained calm. "Not formally at first." Miss Marple listened. "A farming couple took me in." "Were they kind?" "Very." A brief smile appeared. "They became my parents in every way that mattered." "And later?" "When I turned 18, my adoptive mother gave me a photograph." The photograph. The same one Simmons had described. She told me only one thing. "What?" "Victor," Michael, looked toward the fireplace. "That my real mother had wanted me to know the truth." Miss Marple nodded, exactly as she had suspected. For years he had searched, one clue leading to another. Fragments of names, half-forgotten records, rumours. Eventually, every trail pointed toward Brindle Ash, toward Foxglove Hall, toward Harriet Penfold. "Did Harriet tell you what happened?" Michael hesitated. A very important hesitation. Then, part of it. "What part?" "Enough to know my mother did not abandon me." Miss Marple remained silent. That fact alone carried enormous weight. Many adopted children spent their lives haunted by questions. The fear of abandonment often proved the most painful. To discover otherwise changed everything. "Harriet was frightened," Michael continued. "Yes, she believed someone else knew I had arrived." Miss Marple watched him carefully. "And did she say who?" "No." "Interesting. Perhaps true, perhaps not." Michael still concealed something. She was becoming increasingly certain of it. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. When it ended, Miss Marple possessed a clearer picture than ever before. Yet one final piece remained missing. The crucial piece. The piece connecting Clara Bennet's disappearance to Harriet's murder. Without it, certainty remained impossible. That piece arrived unexpectedly the following day. From the river, a group of children exploring the banks discovered several damp papers trapped among reeds downstream from the culvert. Most were damaged beyond recovery. The current had done its work, yet a few remained legible. Inspector Graves immediately collected them. Within hours he requested Miss Marple's presence. The inspector appeared more serious than she had ever seen him. "You need to look at this." He handed her a photograph. The image was faded, old, nearly 25 years old, yet the figures remained recognizable. Miss Marple studied it carefully. A young Clara Bennet stood smiling beside a man. Arthur Fairchild. No surprise there. Then she noticed a third figure, partially obscured, standing several feet behind them, watching. Not smiling. Edward Penfold. Interesting. Very interesting. There was writing on the back, Inspector Graves said. Miss Marple turned the photograph over. The handwriting belonged to Harriet. A date, a location, and 4 words. Clara doesn't trust him. Miss Marple looked up slowly. Inspector Graves nodded. Exactly. The recovered papers included something even more significant. A letter. Not complete. Partially damaged. Yet enough survived. Miss Marple read carefully. The letter appeared to have been written by Clara herself. Several lines were missing. Others remained intact. One passage survived almost perfectly. If anything happens to me, Harriet already knows why. Miss Marple read the sentence twice, then a third time. The implications were devastating. Clara had anticipated danger, not scandal. Danger. Real danger. Inspector Graves paced the room. This changes everything. Yes, Cedric Wren is clearly innocent. That became apparent some time ago. The inspector pretended not to hear. By evening, another development emerged. A retired solicitor from a neighbouring county came forward after seeing newspaper coverage of the case. He possessed information concerning Arthur Fairchild. Specifically, Arthur's sudden departure from England in late 1936. The timing mattered enormously, because Arthur had not fled scandal. He had fled fear. According to the solicitor, Arthur had attempted repeatedly to report concerns regarding Clara's disappearance. His accusations were dismissed. His reputation suffered. Eventually he left for Canada, where he died years later, still insisting Clara Bennett had been harmed. That night Miss Marple sat alone reviewing every fact. The solution hovered directly before her, almost complete, almost. Then a memory returned, a tiny memory, one she had nearly forgotten. The very first afternoon Victor Hale arrived at Foxglove Hall, the conversation in the drawing room, the strangers, the tea, the stories, and one peculiar detail. Victor had spoken about villages. He had said villages remembered. At the time it sounded like casual conversation. Now it struck her differently, because someone else had spent 22 years remembering as well. Someone who had watched events unfold, someone who had carried knowledge, someone who feared exposure, someone who recognized Michael Bennett almost immediately. Miss Marple stood abruptly. The final piece had arrived. Not evidence, understanding, pure understanding, the most powerful kind. She now knew why Harriet had died, why Michael had been targeted, why the documents were stolen, why the anonymous letters appeared decades apart, and most importantly, why the murderer had made one fatal mistake, a mistake born from arrogance. The same arrogance that had begun this tragedy 22 years earlier. The following morning she requested a private meeting with Inspector Graves. The inspector arrived promptly. One look at her face told him everything. You know. Yes. The word came quietly. You are certain. Miss Marple nodded. As certain as one ever can be. Then tell me. The old lady smiled. A very small smile. No. Inspector Graves blinked. No? Not yet. The inspector stared in disbelief. Miss Marple continued knitting. There is one thing I still require. What? A reaction. A reaction. From the murderer, the inspector groaned. Miss Marple ignored him. I intend to provide an opportunity. For what? To make another mistake. The inspector removed his spectacles, rubbed his eyes, then replaced them. You've set a trap. Yes. Does anyone else know? No. Good Lord. Miss Marple smiled gently. People reveal themselves when they believe they are about to lose everything. The inspector looked deeply unhappy. Please tell me this trap doesn't involve corpses. It certainly does not. That is the most reassuring thing you've said all month. Miss Marple resumed knitting, but behind the calm expression, every detail of the coming confrontation had already been arranged. The game was nearly over. The murderer simply did not know it yet. Chapter 9. Miss Marple's Invitation. 3 days later, invitations arrived across Brindle Ash. The notes were brief, polite, entirely ordinary in appearance, yet they produced considerable curiosity. Miss Marple requested the presence of a small group at Foxglove Hall on Thursday evening. No explanation accompanied the invitation, only a time. 7 o'clock. Promptly. By Thursday afternoon, speculation had reached extraordinary levels. Mrs. Edith Barlow declared herself absolutely certain an arrest was imminent. By 5 o'clock she had changed her mind twice. By 6 she had concluded that a secret engagement would also be announced. Nobody understood how the two theories coexisted. Mrs. Barlow seemed unconcerned by the contradiction. Foxglove Hall felt strangely alive that evening. For the first time since Harriet's death, its rooms filled with conversation once more. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The library fire burned brightly. Lamps cast pools of golden light across shelves and polished furniture. Inspector Graves arrived first. He looked deeply skeptical. "You still haven't told me your plan." "No." "You enjoy this?" "Only slightly." The inspector sighed. He suspected the answer was considerably more than slightly. The guests arrived one by one. Oliver Penfold, Victor Hale, Michael Bennet, Alice Grayson, Reverend Finch, Cedric Wren, Mrs. Barlow, and several others whose names had surfaced repeatedly throughout the investigation. The atmosphere felt polite, yet strained. Everyone understood that Miss Marple had not gathered them for tea and conversation. Something important was about to happen. At precisely 7:15, Miss Marple rose. The room gradually quieted. Even Mrs. Barlow stopped speaking. A remarkable achievement. Miss Marple folded her hands. "Thank you all for coming." Nobody replied. The silence deepened. "Many people," she began, "believe murder is primarily about violence." She spoke softly, yet every person listened. "In my experience, murder is usually about fear." A log shifted in the fireplace. Sparks fluttered briefly upward. Miss Marple continued. "Fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of consequences." Her gaze moved slowly around the room. Several people looked uncomfortable. That was understandable. Discussions of murder often produce discomfort, particularly among murderers. Harriet Penfold was not killed because of something that happened in 1958. She paused. She was killed because of something that happened in 1936. Nobody moved, yet the room felt suddenly smaller. Miss Marple began recounting the story, not dramatically, simply, methodically, as though discussing village gardening, which somehow made it more effective. She described Clara Bennet, her employment at Foxglove Hall, her relationship with Arthur Fairchild, her pregnancy, her fear, the anonymous letter, the hidden child. Michael Bennet sat motionless throughout. Only his eyes betrayed emotion. Several minutes passed. Nobody interrupted. Even Inspector Graves remained silent. He had learned that Miss Marple preferred uninterrupted explanations, particularly near conclusions. "Most people assumed Clara disappeared voluntarily," Miss Marple said. "They were mistaken." The words settled heavily across the room. Oliver closed his eyes. Alice Grayson looked shocked. Cedric Wren frowned. "Clara Bennet intended to leave Brindle Ash," Miss Marple continued, "but not alone." Her gaze drifted toward the old photographs arranged upon a nearby table. Arthur Fairchild intended to marry her. Another surprise. Several guests exchanged glances. The assumption of abandonment had become deeply rooted over the years. Now it crumbled. "Unfortunately," Miss Marple said quietly, "someone else had become interested in Clara." The room grew very still. "Edward Penfold." Oliver lowered his head. The silence confirmed the accusation more effectively than words. Miss Marple described Edward's unwanted attention, Harriet's concern, Clara's growing fear, the warning signs everyone ignored. The pieces fit together naturally, almost too naturally, as if they had waited years to be assembled. Then came the crucial moment, the moment toward which the entire explanation had been moving. Miss Marple looked toward the fire. For many years, people asked the wrong question. "What question?" Inspector Graves asked. "Why did Clara disappear?" Miss Marple looked up. The correct question is different. Nobody spoke. The correct question is, who knew what happened to her? The room seemed to freeze. Every face turned toward her. Every face except one. One person looked away. Only briefly. But Miss Marple noticed. Of course she noticed. She continued. When Michael Bennet arrived in Brindle Ash, he began searching for answers. Michael remained silent. He spoke to Harriet Penfold. She recognized the truth. Miss Marple's voice softened. She recognized Clara's son. A faint tremor crossed Oliver's face. Harriet then did something she had never managed before. Miss Marple paused. She decided to tell the truth. The room remained silent. The significance of those words slowly settled upon everyone present. And that decision frightened somebody. Miss Marple looked directly across the room. At one particular face, one particular expression, one particular pair of eyes. The silence stretched. Seconds passed. Nobody moved. Then Miss Marple said, "The murderer killed Harriet," before she could reveal what she knew. Her voice remained calm, gentle, almost kind, which somehow made the accusation far more devastating. Inspector Graves shifted slightly. His attention followed hers, toward the same individual, the same face, the same eyes. At last he understood. The realization appeared visibly. Miss Marple nodded. Harriet knew who harmed Clara Bennet. Another pause. And so did the murderer. The room felt breathless. Then she delivered the final piece of her trap, the piece she had carefully withheld, the bait, the reason for the gathering, the reason she had delayed naming anyone. "Earlier today," she said, "a document was recovered." This was a lie. No document existed. Only Miss Marple knew that. Inspector Graves almost revealed surprise, then wisely remained silent. The document contains information Clara Bennet recorded shortly before her disappearance. Miss Marple continued. It identifies the person she feared. The reaction was immediate, tiny, almost invisible, yet devastating. One guest's composure shattered. Not dramatically, no gasp, no outburst, only a brief involuntary movement, a hand gripping a chair, a sudden intake of breath, a flash of panic, gone almost instantly, but too late, much too late. Miss Marple saw it, Inspector Graves saw it, and most importantly, the murderer knew they had seen it. The room remained silent. Nobody yet understood exactly what had happened, but everyone felt it, the shift, the change, the moment the balance tilted. Miss Marple folded her hands, her eyes never leaving the same person, the person who had spent 22 years protecting a terrible secret, the person who had killed Harriet Penfold, the person who had tried to kill Michael Bennet, the person who had believed the truth would remain buried forever. Finally she spoke, very quietly, very clearly, and addressed the murderer by name. Chapter 10. The Truth Beneath Foxglove Hall. The room seemed suspended in time. Rain whispered against the windows. The fire crackled softly. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye followed Miss Marple, and every eye settled upon the same person. Oliver Penfold. The name fell gently into the silence, yet its effect was explosive. Oliver stared at her. For a moment he appeared unable to comprehend what he had heard. Then the colour slowly drained from his face. Around the room came murmurs of disbelief. Alice Grayson gasped. Cedric Wren actually rose halfway from his chair. Even Mrs. Barlow looked stunned into silence, a phenomenon rarely witnessed. Inspector Graves spoke first. "Oliver?" The doctor remained motionless. His expression seemed caught between shock and exhaustion, as though he had reached the end of a journey he had been dreading for years. "No," Oliver said at last. The denial sounded weak. Not indignant, not outraged, simply tired. Miss Marple regarded him sadly. "Yes, Dr. Penfold." The room fell silent once more. Michael Bennet stood slowly. His face had become pale. "You?" he asked quietly. Oliver could not meet his eyes. Miss Marple folded her hands. "I believe, Dr. Penfold, that you have been living with this burden for a very long time." Oliver laughed, a short, bitter sound. Burden. The word seemed to amuse him, or perhaps wound him. Inspector Graves stepped forward. "You'd better explain." Oliver remained silent. So Miss Marple did. "It began in 1936. Her voice remained calm, measured, the voice of a woman discussing ordinary human behavior rather than tragedy. Edward Penfold became obsessed with Clara Bennet. Oliver closed his eyes. Miss Marple continued. Harriet attempted to protect her. Arthur Fairchild attempted to protect her. Clara attempted to escape. The room listened. No one interrupted. But one evening, Miss Marple said, everything changed. She looked toward Oliver. "Isn't that correct?" For several moments he said nothing. Then slowly, very slowly, he nodded. The truth emerged, not all at once, piece by piece, like a photograph developing in darkness. Clara Bennet had arranged to leave Brindle Ash. Arthur Fairchild intended to meet her. They would leave together, marry elsewhere, raise their child, begin again. It was not an ideal plan, but it was a plan, a future. She never reached it. On the evening before her departure, Clara came to Foxglove Hall. She hoped Harriet could help. She wanted advice, protection, perhaps simply reassurance. Unfortunately, Harriet was absent. She had gone to visit a relative in the neighbouring village. Only Oliver was home. At 16, Oliver had witnessed months of tension, his father's behaviour, the arguments, Clara's fear, the whispers among servants, the growing sense that something terrible was approaching. That night, Clara confided in him. She trusted him. He was young, kind, safe, or so she believed. Oliver's voice finally entered the story. Quiet, broken. "I told my father." The confession barely rose above a whisper. No one moved. "I didn't mean—" His words faltered. "I didn't understand." Tears filled his eyes. The years seemed to collapse around him. Suddenly he looked very old. "I thought he only wanted to speak with her." Silence. "I was 16. Another silence. "I was stupid." Miss Marple nodded sadly. "I believe that is true, not cruelty. Simple truth." Edward Penfold learned Clara planned to leave, learned where she intended to go, learned when, because his son told him. What happened next remained partly unknown. No witness survived. No confession existed. Yet enough evidence remained, enough understanding, enough human nature. Edward confronted Clara near an abandoned gardener's cottage on the Foxglove Hall estate. An argument followed, a desperate argument. Perhaps she threatened exposure. Perhaps she threatened the police. Perhaps she simply refused to obey. The precise words no longer mattered. What mattered was the outcome. Edward Penfold killed her. The room remained utterly silent. Even the rain seemed quieter. Oliver stared into the fire. His face had become wet with tears. "I knew." The words emerged painfully. "I knew almost immediately." Miss Marple nodded. "Yes, because Edward returned home that night, agitated, mud on his clothing, a torn cuff, and a look his son never forgot. Oliver suspected, then became certain, and spent the rest of his life trying not to think about it. Harriet knew too, Miss Marple said. Not immediately, but eventually. Oliver nodded again. The anonymous letter arrived shortly afterward, the one saying, "For everyone's sake, let the matter rest." Harriet recognized the warning. So did Oliver. Neither spoke. Neither went to the police. Neither exposed Edward Penfold. Years passed. Edward died. The scandal faded. The village forgot, or thought it had. But Harriet never forgot. Nor did Oliver. Guilt remained, waiting, growing, a quiet poison. Then Michael Bennet arrived. The lost child, the living reminder, the proof that the past had not disappeared. Harriet recognized him, perhaps from Clara's features, perhaps from Arthur's, perhaps from something else. It hardly mattered, she knew, and for the first time in 22 years, she decided to tell the truth. That decision terrified Oliver, not because he feared prison, not because he feared disgrace, because he feared losing the final memory of his family, the illusion, the lie, the fragile structure supporting decades of silence. Michael looked at him. "She was my mother." Oliver nodded weakly. "Yes." "Did you know where she was buried?" The question struck like a blow. Oliver closed his eyes. For several moments he could not answer. Then, "Yes." A sound escaped Alice Grayson, half gasp, half sob. Miss Marple continued gently. The hidden clue was never the letters, nor the stolen documents. It was Oliver's guilt. She looked around the room. Every time Clara Bennett was mentioned, he reacted. Not like a witness, like a participant. The realization spread gradually. People remembered conversations, expressions, moments that now appeared different. Harriet's murder had followed the same pattern. She intended to reveal the truth. Oliver panicked. They argued in the old boathouse, not because he hated her, because he loved her, and could not bear what she planned to do. The argument became physical, brief, chaotic, tragic. Oliver grabbed her. Harriet fell, struck her head against the edge of a wooden bench. Hard, fatally. An accident, but only at first. Instead of calling for help, Oliver staged the scene, concealed evidence, allowed suspicion to fall elsewhere, and crossed a line from panic into murder. Later he stole the documents, destroyed records, sent anonymous warnings, and when Michael came too close to the truth, he attempted to kill him. The room remained frozen. No one doubted it now. The pieces fit perfectly. Every clue, every inconsistency, every secret. Inspector Graves stepped forward slowly. "Is it true?" Oliver did not answer immediately. At last he looked toward Michael, the son of the woman whose life had been destroyed, the child who had spent decades searching. Then Oliver whispered, "Yes." The word ended everything. For a long time nobody spoke. There seemed nothing left to say. The mystery was solved, the truth exposed, the dead finally acknowledged. Outside, the rain began to ease. Later that night, after Oliver had been taken away, Miss Marple stood alone in the gardens of Foxglove Hall. Michael joined her. Neither spoke for several moments. The autumn air felt cool and clean. "Do you think she suffered?" he finally asked. Miss Marple knew exactly whom he meant. Clara. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Then what do I do now?" Miss Marple considered, then smiled gently. "The same thing everyone must do after discovering the truth." "And what is that?" "Live with it." Michael nodded slowly. For the first time since arriving in Brindle Ash, he seemed lighter, not happy. Such endings rarely produced happiness, but lighter. The weight of uncertainty had finally been lifted. They stood together beneath the darkening sky, the hall behind them, the village beyond, the past, at last, uncovered. Miss Marple looked toward the distant church tower. Human beings, she reflected, possessed an astonishing capacity for self-deception. They buried truths, protected lies, convinced themselves that silence could erase wrongdoing. Yet the past remained patient, very patient. It waited, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades, but eventually, one way or another, it demanded to be remembered. And in Brindle Ash, after 22 years, it finally had been. The end.